The Skies Are Mine is a steampunk dragon story that I wrote a couple days ago, and this is going to be its first edit. So this is the first time I'm sitting down with it to edit. I don't know necessarily what needs to be changed, so we can look through. There's always more I could have done with this in a world like this. If you had dragons and steamships and all sorts of things going on, that you could do a whole bunch of things, make a whole series out of it as opposed to a short story. So I'm going to try and see if I can make changes here without turning this into like a novella epic of some kind. So we're looking at The Skies Are Mine by J. Wilburn. Since the dragon attacks had begun again, commerce. Okay, that's the wrong place to put a comma. All right. It's always good to find mistakes in the first sentence. Since the dragon attacks had begun again, commerce, especially in the air, but also by land and sea, had been crippled. Now only the knights and their airships dared to enter the skies above the terrified land. They guarded the borders, but trying to repel attacks from all directions had spread the royal fleet thin. To the northwest, above the highest peaks of the Grey Mountains, very creative name there, huh? The Grey Mountains, only the trio of Laws, Baz, and Roe guarded these treacherous winds. The hope was that they could handle it, that no dragons would risk those deadly downdrafts themselves, or that if they did, their three best knights could handle it. I think I said handle it twice. Could, let's say, repel it. Because I don't want to use the same word over and over in a paragraph. As Sir Lawrence Sixsmith, on the deck of the Tarpon, below 6 windbags, saw the creature undulating through the violent winds over the peaks toward him, he certainly had his doubts. He flipped the control levers and opened the valves, allowing the boiler to heat for the battle and the maneuvers to come. He leaned toward the mouthpiece. All right, that's a compound word. He leaned toward the mouthpiece of the amplifier horn. Before he could say anything, Sir Rowena Moody, from the wheel of her ship, Charity Arrow, let's say projected, because I already used amplified, so I know I don't want to do that more than once, projected her voice to him. We see it, Law. I'm going high, like we planned. Even as she spoke, the nose of her ship turned skyward, and she started to climb through the thin air. To Law's other side, Sir Basil Dauphin took the javelin into a controlled dive. Baz must not have realized his lips were close enough to the mouthpiece to pitch his voice to the other ships. He cursed the wild winds trying to pull him off course, and he mumbled brimstone. I wanted to add something here because I have it at the end. He took the javelin with its oddly festive circus tent stripes over the balloons. Alright, so let's see if that makes sense. Okay, to Law's other side, Sir Basil Dauphin took the javelin with its oddly festive circus tent stripes over the balloons into a controlled dive, so on and so forth. Alright, he said brimstone. Law wrinkled his brow. He thought he must have misheard Baz's rantings, but he aimed the spyglass across the mountains anyway. Black and gray scales fell in and out of focus as the beast closed the distance quickly. Finally, Law caught the dragon in frame as it soared upward again on its course. Its belly was a little lighter than the rest of its, let's say, scales. I left out a word there. Its scales and its massive leathery wings, but only by degrees. It was all severe angles and sharp claws and horns. Extra spikes along its sides and back made it look like the monster was covered in dark thorns. Law caught sight of the dragon's eyes for the briefest moment, pale white flecked with gray, and a rare jagged slash of reptilian black for its eyes. That thin, centered darkness staring back at Law looked like a lightning bolt in negative. He hadn't misheard Baz at all. He wished to the heavens that he had. This was the Nazroi. This ancient beast had been called Brimstone as far back as Law tracked his ancestors and beyond. If it was coming for the kingdom over these treacherous mountains against all the instincts of its species, then this creature was wise and devious. It flew right toward the three of them because it knew that they were in as much danger as it was, and it knew they stood the least chance of repelling him. Law set aside the spyglass and armed the weapons for the fight of his life. If he died today, no doubt he would be a legend, but that seemed small consolation, a poor second prize indeed. Excuse me. The final few lunges of the monster through the air seemed to close the distance in a fraction of the time it took to cross the rest of the range. The air wavering in front of Brimstone's open jaws. The air wavered in front of Brimstone's open jaws. It made him appear to be surfacing from below rough waters. Law knew what it meant, and he deployed the forward shield instead of opening up with his own attack. Flame like burning liquid ignited from the pouches and ducts within the reptile's cheeks. As the flame met the outside air, it spread and brightened, spilling over the double rows of sharp teeth in the dragon's wide maw. Fire washed out the world around Law and his ship. He felt as though he had locked himself within a furnace. It wasn't far from the truth. The thick fabric of the deployed shield held briefly, but then ignited and split open in several places. The dragon roared and the fire cut off just as the shield, let's say cut off abruptly. Abruptly. You usually don't want to edit adverbs into a story, but I think I need it there. The dragon roared and the fire cut off abruptly just as his shield twirled away in burning ribbons under his keel. The heat had lifted his ship sharply, and the new wave of cold dropped him again. The dragon had veered under him, and now he risked crashing on its thorny back, racing by below. Law whirled control wheels and stressed the bell of his boilers in order to steer himself away from the immediate danger. The flap of Brimstone's... Okay, that's his name, so I need to capitalize it. The flap of Brimstone's starboard wing shook the hull like a quake. Law held on as the deck tilted nearly sideways in his evasive maneuver. The dragon's tail... I need to make that possessive, because the tail belongs to the dragon. The dragon's tail, more deadly than any flail ever forged by men, swung toward him. All right, I need to put a comma there. He released air from the bags. No, I need to be specific here because the dragon could be doing it. Law released air from the bags and spiked into a downdraft on purpose. The sharp points of the two tail spikes. All right, two of the monsters. Let me see if I fixed it there. Sharp points from, let's say from instead of as. That may make it instead of. That may make more sense. Sharp points from two of the monster's tail spikes. Yes, that's better. Raked, not racked. Let's have it raked. Raked his hull and tore away heat. Let's name the ship. Tarpon's. Raked Tarpon's hull and tore away heat-resistant tiles. It was better than shattering upon them. As Law spun down in a death spiral, like being trapped in a violent whirl. Let's put a comma there. That's what I need. All right, we'll start that one again. As Law spun down in a death spiral, like being trapped in a violent whirlpool, he calmly refilled the bags and turned the wheels slowly. Trying to come out... I need a word out here. Trying to come out of the dive too abrupt would split his ship apart. Turning at the wrong angle would slam him into the sheer mountainside. He eased himself around as turbulence shook the world. into a meaningless blur. If the old dragon decided to press the attack on him, he would be dead before he saw Brimstone coming. The vibrations of the rough winds remained, but he could see again as he leveled far below the dragon's wake. Alright, period instead of comma. He was lower than Baz's ship, looking up at its ruddy belly. Its ruddy belly and funny stripes. Let's say. That meant he was way out of formation. The dragon circled on. The dragon circled on Ro as the beast now had her and Charity Arrow isolated. Either the dragon was wiser in strategy than the three of them combined, or they were just fools fighting a monster like this under these conditions. Alright, Ro lit up the beast's side with a barrage of explosive harpoons. They burst bright. Let me put a Y there. I often leave off the Y and a they when it's at the beginning of a sentence. I'm still used to writing the, I guess. They burst bright off the creature's hard-side scales. She might as well have been firing on the mountain itself for all the good it would do. But then the last several projectiles all hit at the connection of the dragon's wing on that side. The beast roared again like before. It veered hard away from the attack and downward as it folded its abused wing to its side. That's exactly what the monster did when it stopped its fire attack on Law's ship. That was no accident. Ro had attacked it first and saved Law by a hair's width. He noted that he owed her a drink if they survived this. The dragon twisted in the air and flapped both wings out from its body. Very hard to stabilize itself again. The creature found itself positioned between the three ships in a crossfire, with Law being the low ship this time. Brimstone might be wiser than Law, but it appeared Ro had them all beat in cleverness. All right. Baz took up the fight. Baz took up the fight and struck. Not sure what I was trying to say there. It feels like I was trying to do something else than what was there because it didn't make sense. Baz took up the fight and struck the other wing with, chain ties. The heavy weight spun through the air as the chains wrapped the leathery wing like something thin and weak. The dragon roared in what had to be rage and frustration. It spit a thin cord of fire out into the windy sky. The fire twisted in all sorts of interesting shapes. The creature folded its wings and dropped again, escaping the ties in the process. Now it was level with Law and below the new crossfire point. It turned its dark, lightning eyes on Law and wavered in front of its... and the air. The air wavered and distorted in front of its ugly face. Law finally joined the fight and unloaded his forward weapons into its open mouth. The great lizard choked and twisted away. Law had missed its mouth, more than he hit. And he hit, but may have scratched its eye. More of the arsenal from the higher two ships fell on the dragon's back. It whipped its head from side to side and flapped hard to drive itself straight upward. If it had a strategy at that point, the ancient dragon was simply trying to clear itself of all the irritation. The chemicals it left unignited in the air behind smelled... let me put an ED there. Smelled like the acidic mix of the squires used for cleaning iron. Brimstone spun upward and soared between the other two ships. It turned in the high air and sprayed a wide breadth of fire down on Ro and Baz. Law cursed and powered up his boilers to get himself up where the fight was. Roe and Baz scrambled. Did I say scrambled for him? No, I didn't. Two of her balloons burst and disintegrated. Baz had a number of blackened ropes snap, and he struggled to get the ship stabilized as it spun downward through the air. Law soared up between them both. He glanced both ways. Rose swung from a rope from one side of her ship to the other as she repositioned the surviving airbags. She had a broad, toothy smile across her face. Law wanted to read that as fear, but it sure looked like she was having fun. Baz was a different story. His ship threatened to roll over from the missing ropes. If it did, it would dump him to the ground. As he struggled to save his ship and himself, his clothing was scorched, hair singed, and his skin blistered from fresh burns. Law raced upward, past and away. Law raced upward. I think I'm going to put a comma here. I don't know if that's actually right, but I think it works for just reading it. Law raced upward, past and away from them to face the dragon alone, to give them time to regroup. The beast tried to wash Law in fire as well, but he flew right at its belly. The fire missed him, and he exploded a few loaded harpoons against those lighter scales. The dragon tried to flap backward, but Law matched the beast and stayed nosed up to its underside. The dragon roared and tried to claw the ship away. This was the risk of this foolhardy play. Law aimed up and peppered the underside of the dragon's jaw. The beast hissed and snapped. Its claws missed him, and it flapped backward, so Law stayed with it. The monster growled out a series of complex noises that sounded all the world like language. All men who knew the languages of dragons were long dead. Okay. So we're going to kind of give this dragon some agency where maybe it's sentient and can speak. The monster growled out a series of complex noises that sounded all the world like, say, for all the world like language. All men who knew the languages of dragon were long dead, though. Alright, now we back to Law, so we need to say his name again. Law had no eyes on his friends, but he knew time was what they needed. Need to change a tense here. Time was what they needed, and as much as he could buy them. Law caught sight. Let's say he caught sight of something else dark and closing behind him. He thought it was either Roe or Baz returning to help, but the shape was too big. He turned back into the fight and harassed the lizard some more to keep its claws off him a little while longer. Roe's voice carried up from below. She was amplifying something to him. He hoped her ship and what remained of her arsenal would be close behind. Behind you, she cried. All he could think was a second dragon. They could barely hold their own with the first one. As Brimstone twisted away and dove downward a little to get away from Law, he took the chance to swing out and wide. Alright, to get away from Law, say the knight took the chance to swing his ship out wide to keep the second beast from burning him up from behind. Okay, sorry. What he saw as he brought the tarpoon around scared him more than a pair of dragons would have. He recognized it right away, but had to get over a few seconds of denial in order to process it. It was the Dreadmore. Lore Shrines. Not lore, Lord. Okay. I was about to say, did I use that as a name? But that's not what I meant. Lord Shrine's Flying Fortress. And I need to put an ing on there. Alright, thank goodness we have editing. As Brimstone flew out over the mountains again, Law said, "Very good, turn your wrath on that villain for a little while." But then Brimstone swung wide behind the flying fortress, and Shrine's crew fired a volley of shots in the direction of the trio of knights and the kingdom. Law's jaw unhinged in shock. The ships were far out of range, and the barrage fell harmless through the mountain passes below. Still, it gave the dragon a moment to recover. Brimstone or Lord Shrine alone were formidable enemies, but together, let's put a comma here, if they were in fact working together, they were worse than any nightmare Law had ever experienced in his natural life. He made what he could of the lull as well. He reloaded and used the spyglass to try to locate his compatriots. Baz was flying very low. The belly of his ship must have been brushing the treetops down there. It looked as if the knight and his trusty airship were both suffering terrible blows. Had both suffered terrible blows. He could not find Roe or Charity Arrow at all. Say he could not locate. Did I say locate before? No, I didn't. Locate's a better word. He could not locate Roe or Charity Arrow at all. Law cranked up the boilers until steam leaked loud, hot, and shrill from the seams. I need to remember that because later I'll need to mention that the boilers are damaged. This was no way to treat a ship that you planned to fly for years, but it might be a thing you would do if you only planned to live one more day. He unleashed all that power and skipped across the tops of the wind currents at surprising speed. By the time Shrine and his crew got a few shots off, Law was bobbing up and down on the uneven wind in too jagged a pattern for them to aim and hit. The Dreadmore turned hard over the mountains to try to avoid Law's reckless, headlong strike. A ship the size of Shrine's was stable and hard to take down, but it was slow to move. As it turned, Law caught sight of the great dragon perched on the back of the Dreadmore where it rested. There was no doubt now. Brimstone and Lord Shrine had formed a dark alliance. Law himself was going to be one of the first victims of that partnership. When they, let's say, unholy partnership. When they spoke of his sacrifice, it would be his failure and not his bravery that would be remembered in the dark days to come, he now knew. As Brimstone launched and puffed out its cheeks to ignite a new and final fire for Law, Charity arrows soared up from below the enemy. Roe turned her vessel hard, as if going into a new dive. Before the dragon could complete its flap, Roe unloaded every armament she had left into its exposed wing. The dragon roared and closed its eyes tight as it twisted to the side, away from the pain. In its blind fall, it crashed into the Dreadmore and ruptured its hull. Crewmen fell screaming toward the mountains below. There's going to be something I'm going to add here in just a moment. The ship wobbled through the rest of its turn, and it flew away from the kingdom as it vented steam and lost altitude a bit at a time. Law felt a dark hope that Lord Shrine would not make it home. The Dreadmore was tough, though, and was hard to bring down, even damaged. Brimstone rolled over. The great dragon dove. Law expected it to rip through Roe's ship, but the beast dove past her as if she were no concern. The monster snatched the falling, screaming crewman in its claws, one by one. It didn't get them all, as the last few fell to their deaths. The dragon flapped hard. I guess I should, maybe this should be a new paragraph. I don't know. I'm going to make it a new paragraph anyway. The dragon flapped hard upward. Come on now. Okay, the dragon flapped hard upward, and Law was sure Brimstone intended to eat the men it had caught, right up until the moment it set them gently upon a surviving section of the deck, of the Dreadmoor's deck. Law stared in shock. The beast really was for the kingdom's enemy. The beast really was for the kingdom's enemy. It had invested itself in saving as many of its allies as it could. Law burned with anger and jealousy that the dragon would save those men even as it tried to bring down Law and his fellow knights. This was truly a war then. Sides had been drawn, and they had a dragon. Okay. Brimstone rolled over and turned its snout northward as well. I don't need as well anymore. Turned its snout northward. Let's say it rolled over away from the Sky Fortress. All right. Brimstone rolled away from the Sky Fortress and turned its snout northward. In its retreat, however, its spiked tail tore off the port side of Roe's ship. Okay, now I need to alter things a little bit. I need to come up here and say something. The great dragon dove. Law expected it to rip Roe's ship apart, but the beast dove past her as if she were no concern. Roe started to climb through the troublesome winds. Okay, now I got her coming up. All right, adding all that stuff kind of made a mistake for myself. This was truly a war then. Sides had been drawn and they had a dragon. Let's say in the other side had a dragon. Okay. Brimstone rolled over away from the Sky Fortress and turned its snout northward. In its retreat, however, its spiked tail tore off the port side of Roe's rising ship. She fell back. She fell back into a dive, and now she careened for the ground out of control. Okay. There we go. All right, now we'll catch back up with the narrative as it was already written. Law emptied his airbags and dove steeper than her. As Roe clung to her deck and braced herself for impact, the Tarpoon, piloted by Law, hit the damaged side of her ship first. Deck boards peeled away into the rushing air. She met eyes with him as they dove together. He waved her over like she was late for an appointment. Roe charged across the splintering ship. The vessels already started to pull away from each other. As Law refilled his airbags, she leapt the final distance, seeing nothing but the rocky ground under her feet. Say far under her feet. She rolled onto his deck as his ship shook through a violent turn. Roe peered back long enough to watch her beloved ship break apart on the mountainside. Then she started working the controls to help Law navigate these impossible winds and passes. Steam wafted from several places. It should not have been leaking. Okay, let me combine that with the next paragraph, which shows what's going wrong with the ship there. All right, so I'll bring this up. 2 of his ropes snapped. They continued to adjust as they hooked low around one of the mountains. They swung out over the foothills in the kingdom's territory again. The winds grew kinder with every bit of distance they put between themselves and the Gray Mountains. Again, most creative mountain name ever. The Gray Mountains. All right. Law scanned the clear skies and spotted the dark shapes of a dragon and a villain retreat in a villain's ship. Retreating side by side. This war was far from over, but the kingdom had been defended today. He surrendered his controls to Roe and leaned over the side, searching the forest below to the south for Baz's ship. Anything she asked. He said, "Hold steady and go slow. Get us out over the trees." Those crazy stripes on his balloon should be easy enough to spot. If a dragon didn't scorch his ship black, then maybe. Law did not look away from the ground. He was burned, but not completely. Roe did not respond, but held steady. After long minutes, Law shouted, "There!" The ship and its deflated airbags had hung up in the canopy below. He had covered several miles in his controlled crash. I'll say Baz. Baz had covered several miles in his controlled crash. About a quarter mile farther south, a column of gray smoke spired into the sky. Baz was still standing and waving. He looked hurt. He'd looked hurt the last time Law saw him, but apparently he wasn't gone yet. Law lifted a hand, but before he could speak, Rose said, "I see it. I'm descending now. There's room to land, and then we can get word to the rest of the fleet and the kingdom as well. Law sighed, it does not feel like a victory, does it? Sometimes surviving has to be victory enough. I will not get over the loss of my ship soon, though. Your ship is leaking from every seam. We need to load him up quickly and get back to the others while we still can. Alright. As Law watched the thin column of smoke rise from the ground, he wondered if there would be more fires and smoke in the kingdom in the near future.